Remarks. So we'll now have our next speaker, Ms. Nancy Gowanus, the UN Secretary General and Special Advisor President to the Secretary General on Africa.
Excellencies, distinguished invited guests, ladies and gentlemen, I'm glad to be here today to address you on behalf of Ms. Amina Mohammed, our Deputy Secretary General of the UN, who sends her apologies and greetings to you. This summit sparks a new thinking on how to promote collective action, achieve shared prosperity and common good for Africa, leveraging its relationship with the Commonwealth family of nations. Without defining common good, several concepts come to mind, such as ethics, integrity, rights, values, justice, fairness, empathy, compassion. These are important concepts for the world and especially for Africa as we continue to experience poverty in the midst of abundant resources and inequality within and between countries. Though the continent has experienced a prolonged period of economic growth and has made progress in reducing poverty, the proportion of our people living in poverty remains high and inequalities are increasing between the rich and poor. This is due mainly to a lack of capacity to make things happen and changing the African narrative of being an Africa rich in natural resources, but unable to provide a better living standard for its people. So, whilst there is rapid population growth, delayed demographic transition, mismatch between sectors of growth and employment, I would argue too of a mismatch between economic policies and social policies, where we are made to believe that higher economic growth means a higher standard of living for our people. So what is the new narrative for Africa? It is about turning Africa's narrative from the image of a poor continent that needs constant help in order to provide for its people to the Africa we want, as encapsulated in the 2063 agenda and buttressed by the 2030 agenda, that can use its resources more effectively. We therefore need to rethink the development strategies and the way in which we develop and implement economic and social policies on the continent. In other words, discussions on the common good should allow us to reflect on the type of societies in the world we want to see and how to achieve that. Societies where people matter more than numbers, where caring for humanity and compassion is more important than our desire to be wealthy and rich as an end in itself, where the war on poverty and inequality is intensified and giving a human face above all, where our common humanity and shared values and shared responsibilities provide the guidance as we travel towards a prosperous Africa. This is the new narrative and the key to realizing the visions of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development of leaving no one behind, and the AU Agenda 2063 of a secure, integrated, peaceful, and prosperous continent we want to see. Now, much has been said about Agenda 2063, that I wouldn't go into it, but I'm sure all of us know what it is. Also, the same of Agenda 23, where we are saying, leave no one behind, that I will just want to point out the linkage between the two. We know that both Agenda 2030 and Agenda 2063 share the same principles and commonalities. They share strategic principles of focusing on people, promoting prosperity, ensuring sustainability of the planet, guaranteeing justice and human rights, and fostering mutually accountable partnerships. Most importantly, in my view, these are goals and aspirations that will help us to achieve the common good. The close alignment between the global and continental goals reinforce, therefore, the synergy in implementation and monitoring. The alignment between this also calls for a harmonized approach in rollout, planning, and implementation. The question, therefore, that one has got to ask ourselves, and in view of what the previous speakers have said, how do we promote a sustained, inclusive, and sustainable economic growth for our African countries? Much has been said about the infrastructural development, but I've always maintained that it is one thing to build a bridge, it's another thing to build a wall across the bridge. And so, as much as we talk about infrastructural development and intra-Africa trade, we are also talking about the free movement of people across the continent. We know that the 2030 agenda's promise to leave no one behind means much more than just a slogan. It means dismantling structural inequalities and injustices that hold back women and girls and millions of others that are excluded from participation in development and political processes within their countries. So we are really talking about the issue of capacity building and infrastructural development on our continent. We are talking about leveraging multi-stakeholder resources, both domestically and internationally through partnerships. We also know that Africa's rich natural resources, as was pointed out earlier by the former president of Ghana, it's not that we do not have the natural resources, but it is really about how we harness efficiently and sustainably so that it has got a greater impact on our economic and social development on the continent. As a result of increased climate change, we are facing more and more climatic conditions that many of our countries had not been used to. In my own country, Namibia, where we have been talking about drought, I've always maintained we can no longer see drought as just happening once in 10 years. It is something that is now part and parcel of our lives. And so it's not just about mitigating the impacts of drought, but it is really how to live alongside drought for many, many years to come. And so we cannot deny the impact of climate change on food security, on nutrition, and the list goes on. And so when, again, to quote former President of Ghana, that when people are disregarding the Paris Agreement, one wonders what the purposes are. Is it to keep Africa in perpetual bondage so that we do not have the ability to make sure that we are food secure, to make sure that we can fight malnutrition and stunting amongst our children? We also need to look at the development of entrepreneurs. So many of our young people are looking towards our governments for employment or looking at others to employ them. But we want to see young people becoming entrepreneurs themselves and have the ability to employ others. Also, in the issue of social development issues, we are looking at investment in health services. As a former Commissioner for Social Affairs at the African Union, I spent my 9 years campaigning for the reduction of maternal mortality in Africa. I could not believe that Africa, rich in natural resources, had women dying while giving life. And so we need, again, it's part of the narrative that we have been talking about. It's on the same continent that we have got stunted children, and we will see the impact of what stunting means in a couple of years when those kids grow up and become adults. So investment in human development therefore becomes a big issue. We have talked a lot about communicable diseases of HIV and AIDS, malaria and tuberculosis. But today on the continent we are faced with hypertension, with heart diseases, with diabetes. And therefore, unless we ourselves as Africans start putting those issues on the global agenda, they will continue to remain neglected diseases on our continent. So I have touched on another issue, and the final issue is the issue of social protection. I think a lot of people have said, if we have social protection systems or social welfare systems, we are creating dependency. And I've said to people that argue that way, that you must learn, you must try to live on $100 a month that you receive as a pension, or that you receive and it will not be seen as a handout, but it has been a survival for many people. So I would really urge that we also look at social protection systems, old age pensions, grants given to people with disabilities, and as well as food assistance to those that are in need of food. And finally, the issue of migration was mentioned, just to say that for the longest of time we have said migration should not just be looked at from a legal and a negative point of view, but migration and development are closely linked together. And so when people come to our countries, they are not just coming to take over jobs from us. They are in fact coming to contribute to the development within our countries. I've touched on the issue of climate change, the question of conflict prevention rather than merely managing conflicts. It's one of the challenges that we have. We put a lot of money in humanitarian interventions, but what should really happen is that we need to put a lot of money in development, so that if we can develop the continent in that way, we are also preventing conflicts. So in conclusion, I just want to say that last night at the Commonwealth ceremony that was held, I don't know how many of you watched it, but I watched it, and there was a song that said, "Waiting for a changing world." And I want to say that no, we are not waiting for a changing world. The landscape has changed. The world is changing. But what we should ask ourselves is that is it changing for the greater good or the common good of the people, where we are putting people first? Or are we changing to continue the greed and the corruption that we witness across the world? I'm glad that this year's theme, adopted at the AU Summit, is focused on the fight against corruption, because it undermines development, peace and human rights, and take away the very needed resources to achieve the common good for all. Fighting corruption and greed, therefore, is fighting to achieve the common good. Thank you.